Good afternoon. Oh, wow. That's got some great volume to it, doesn't it? I was speaking into a microphone a couple weeks ago, and it did not work nearly this well. So, we'll say good afternoon. I'm going to say good afternoon to you, and you say good afternoon back to me. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, very good. Thank you. I always like to start that way just to make sure, everyone is awake and alive and here and present. So thank you all for coming today. My name is Dr. Jelena Oxley, and I direct the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values. We're housed in the College of Humanities and Fine Arts. And so my job is part of the wonderful parts of my job is to bring in speakers who come in to talk about different ethical issues that are of relevance to our time. And so this semester, we're going to be having a little series on AI and ethics, and this is our first speaker. And I've invited Dr. Zebrowski to be our speaker. So I'm going to introduce her in just a second. For those of you who haven't attended our events before, I'll just tell you a little bit about how it's going to go. We're going to have about 40 or so minutes where Robin's going to speak, and then we'll have 15 or so minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So whatever your burning questions are, be sure to write them down, and then we will have time at the end for discussion. So let me just go ahead and introduce Dr. Zebrowski. So I'm excited to introduce to you today Professor Robin Zebrowski, who's a philosopher and cognitive scientist at Beloit College. Over the last couple of days while she's been here, I've been learning a lot about different models of the mind and how they relate to artificial intelligence. It turns out that the way that artificial intelligence is now produced is based on a very specific conception of the mind, namely one that views it as an information processing machine. I learned from Robin that there are in fact other conceptions of the mind, namely ones that sees us as embodied people that are capable of different kinds of cognition, not to mention emotions, passions, and gut instincts, such as a basic drive for hunger and or sleep. I hope that you don't experience any of those bodily drives today while you're in the talk. If you are hungry or need to fall asleep, just wait until afterwards. We do have snacks if anybody needs anything. So I will just go ahead and confess that I was feeling pretty neutral about AI before Robin came, although I was kind of mad that Anthropic had stolen some of my research that it had used to program Claude. I'm not alone here. I'm sure many of my colleagues in the room have also had their work stolen and then used by Anthropic to program Claude. So that being said, I was open and I saw some advantages to the new technology, and I could see also some disadvantages. At this point, I'm really just baffled by the technology, and I'll rush to embrace it without really thinking about the consequences of what this means for our future and how we think of ourselves as human beings. So there are three things that I've taken away from Robin over the last few days. I'm just going to say those so that you'll be prepared for her talk today. I think what I've come away with is that I need to think about who I am, namely as an embodied human being that has a digital tool to use, but that digital tool doesn't have necessarily my best interest at heart, and I still need to think about what those are, and we collectively need to think about what those are. Secondly, I've realized how much this is a technology that has billions of dollars being poured into it, and it's not even clear that it helps me save time, though this is what it's being sold to us as being used for. Robin will talk about some of the studies on AI use and time saving, and whether those in fact suggest that it does save us time. The last thing I've learned is that AI is not really, at least generative AI, is not really an invention like a calculator or other kinds of software that do calculations. As some of you have tried ChatGPT might know, it's quite bad at math. It makes simple mistakes unless you give very specific instructions. I didn't quite understand why this was the case until I started talking to Robin. I learned that these are not programmed to arrive at truth. They are programmed to do what's statistically likely given the inputs. So I've learned that it's not really about rule rule-based coding, it's really more about probability patterns. So she's going to talk about a little bit about that today, and the probability patterns emerge from large data sets consisting of, for example, that was my research. So I will try to not hold any grudges as I've learned, but I ask you to be open to what Robin has to teach us today, and we will learn about the ethics and the history of artificial intelligence. So let's welcome to the stage Robin Zebrowski.
Is that good? Can you hear me? Awesome. All right, let me get my timer. There's a lot of talk in here. Right. Is there a... Oh, no, I got it. We're good. Does this work? Yes. Okay. Hi, thank you so much for having me. Should I turn that one off so we don't get feedback? We're good? Okay. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I have had so many great conversations with faculty and students over the last couple of days. A couple of quick notes about the talk that I'm going to give. First, there were so many things that I wanted to say, but we don't have time for me to say them all. And so I cut a bunch of slides, and then this morning talking to Jelena, she's like, are you going to talk about this? I'm like, no, I cut that. Are you going to talk about this? No, I cut that. I'm trying to focus on the ethical questions today, so I cut a whole lot of the stuff about the way these systems work and things like that. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask during the Q&A. There was another one. Oh yeah, there's still way too many slides. I probably will not get through them. A lot of them have big quotes. Those quotes, I won't necessarily read them. A few I will read, but many of them are there. You're welcome to read them while I'm talking. You're also welcome to take photos of them because they usually have their sources on them. I know some people don't like it when people do that. I absolutely welcome it. In fact, when I start talking about things, you'll notice that I often put the investigative news reports as my citations rather than like the original studies and things, in part because I find them more accessible to people who may not be in the area. So you'll see that as I go through. I'm from New Jersey originally, so I talk really fast. I will try very hard to slow down, and I will also occasionally consciously step to the side and take a drink in order to slow down. Again, if I talk too fast, please ask questions in the Q&A. So this is a very rough outline of what I'm going to cover today. So just to give you a sense of my background, I come from cognitive science. I'm a professor of cognitive science, so I have a joint appointment in philosophy, psychology, and computer science. I started doing AI work as an undergrad back in the 90s, so I've been doing work in this area since around 1995. And so I'll talk a little bit about like hype cycles and things. And a lot of it I was there for, which feels really weird because I'm convinced I'm still like 18, but I'm not. So I'll talk about having lived through some of this and what I see now at this moment and how it's similar and different to previous cycles of hype. I cut most of the stuff that I had in the what are large language models just because, again, if I want to focus on the ethics, I gotta sort of move quickly. And I'm gonna spend most of my time on the ethics. I'll show you which parts of the ethics that I'll focus on. I'm going to talk about, as an educator, what I see my role as and what I see the role of educators in general as here. And if you are a student, I think that you should be asking these things of your educators. And then just broad takeaways. And I, again, will definitely run out of time as I'm doing this. So when we use the word AI has changed pretty radically. I mean, over its history in general, but especially recently. So historically, we've talked about weak AI and strong AI. And those are words that we've had since like 1980. And we now often call weak AI narrow AI, and we often call strong AI AGI, although these are not perfectly mapped onto each other, but they're close enough for our purposes. And so weak AI is just good algorithms, right, that are usually deployed as expert systems that do their jobs fairly well, or maybe not so well. As you can see, an early AI overview from Google, where they determined that we should be eating at least one small rock per day. The reason I love this slide is that when I took this screenshot, it was clear to me exactly where this recommendation was coming from. The Onion is in the training set for all of these things, and there's no way for the chatbot to distinguish the Onion from the New York Times. So when you ask it a question, it just pulls up, and really, since there's not a lot of other sources talking about eating rocks, it's just got to pull up the Onion. So when the media generally talk about AI, they mostly mean generative AI, which is a subset of weak AI. So generative AI is ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Midjourney, DALL-E, all of those systems you may be familiar with, versus other kinds of weak AI, things like facial recognition and machine learning systems. Strong AI, or AGI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. Again, these often refer to systems that are understood to be like potentially conscious. We have no such system at this time. It's not even clear whether such a system is possible. This is in part why the philosophers are so interested in AI, because the question is, what is a mind such that this other thing could or could not have one, be one, or do one? Okay, so a little bit about hype. So this quote is one of my favorites. It is not my aim to surprise or shock you, but the simplest way I can summarize is to say that there are now in the world machines that think, that learn, and that create. Moreover, their ability to do these things is going to increase rapidly until in a visible future, the range of problems they can handle will be coextensive with the range to which the human mind has been applied. When I show this to people, I usually ask when they think this is from, and everyone says Sam Altman. He's the CEO of OpenAI. It's not Sam Altman. It's Herbert Simon and Alan Newell in 1958. So the cycle of AI hype has a nice long history. We've had multiple AI hype cycles. Newell and Simon were in sort of that first generation where what we often call GoFi, good old-fashioned AI. It's very unlike today's machine learning systems. It's very rule-based. It's just do this, if then do this. But this was new. Computers were new. What they could do was new. It was really exciting. And Newell and Simon, who famously wrote one of the most famous papers in AI called Computer Science's Empirical Inquiry, in 1978, maybe. They were like, we've done it. We've got minds that are in computers. Similar proclamations show up immediately following Deep Blue's chess win in 1997. So I was already interested in AI, doing AI work with AI experts in 1997, and I vividly remember when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, it was the next hype. Everyone was like, we've done it. We've solved the problem of making machine minds. Here we are. And when you read these sources, they're like, we've done it. We have cognitive systems now. They're going to solve all of the world's problems. Very much the same language you hear now from current CEOs. And then more of you may remember immediately following Watson's Jeopardy win in 2011. So IBM, after Watson beat Ken Jennings in 2011, IBM was like, well, we've done it, which again, they had said in 1997, but they're like, we've really done it now, we're good, we've solved the problems. They sold Watson to a whole bunch of, in particular, medical technology companies, believing that this program was going to revolutionize medicine, and it did not do that even a little bit. It was sold off for parts Years later, no revolution followed Watson's win, even though it was really exciting at the time. Yeah, okay. So here is Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, saying, GPT-3 sort of felt to me like talking to a high school student. 4 felt like you're kind of talking to a college student, he said in a briefing ahead of Thursday's launch, so this was right before 5 came out. GPT-5 is the first time that it really feels like talking to an expert in any topic, like a PhD level expert. So he says this August of 2025, that is not that long ago. So, August 8th, 2025, Bob Kopp runs a query on GPT-5, the one that he says is a PhD level expert. And this was the query. Show me a diagram of US presidents since FDR with their names and years in office under their photos. Please look closely at the photos. Look closely at the names. I think my favorite is Gerald Ford. But Clinton's until 2028, so he's got some stuff to answer for. But like you can see, there's nothing, like there's no basis of fact built into these things. The dates are all wrong, the names are all wrong. George Bush, like these, none of these are the right faces. And this is at its heart why generative AI is kind of problematic in knowledge spaces. And it's because it's not like a portal to the internet that's just getting you the information. It is generating the information. And it is not generating it well at all. These images kill me every time I look at them. They're so hilarious. Here's another one, Ed Zitron on Blue Sky. This is just a portion of this that I blew up since I knew you wouldn't be able to see it. You can see good old Tennessee there and Fiorata. We've got Delsware and Manytand, or what was the one that was really bad? Rotorland, yeah. Like you see the problem, right? This was GPT-5 that was supposed to be a PhD level expert in anything, and it couldn't give us a reliable map of the United States. I would be so embarrassed to have been Sam Altman saying this when this was the product I was releasing. Okay, so what are they? I came across this like 3 days ago and I loved it so much. This is how it feels sometimes to be working in AI right now, is people saying a thing to the system and the system doing that thing and then going, oh my God, it's conscious, I've got it. So yes, I deeply love this image. It's just some random thing that someone scratched out and it's perfect. So I originally had several slides explaining how large language models work. There's not time for that. So I made instead the recipe for a large language model, which is take the entire corpus of English language text that's available on the internet / in books, steal as needed, as Julia mentioned. Step 2, teach an artificial neural network to find the language patterns across all that text. Step 3, when prompted, produce a human-like response without any concern for facts or truth, because the only rule for production is sound human. No rules, all vibes, right? There's nothing that says if you are asked this, reply this. It's all generated in that moment. It is unlike previous AI systems for exactly this reason. Most other systems did have rules, although artificial neural networks have a long history back to the 60s, and they've never been rule-based systems, but we kind of understand roughly what they're doing. Here, we understand what it's doing. It's just not doing what most users of the systems think that it's doing. Okay. What do they do? They answer the question, what would a human response to this prompt look like? They are indeed chatbots. They're designed to just chat with you and sound human. Not a true response, not a good response, not an ethical response, just a human one. And so we sometimes call when it gets things wrong or imagine things that are not the case, we call them hallucinations. I don't actually like the word hallucinations for a whole bunch of reasons, but the same process that produces those errors is the process that produces truths. When it gets something right, it's accidental. It's doing the exact same thing in both cases. It doesn't have a way to check to say, oh, this is fact and this is wrong. It does one thing, and sometimes that thing corresponds to the facts of the matter, and sometimes it doesn't. And there's no way to fix that without making a new kind of system. You have to make a different architecture if you want it to do something different. And here's a quote from Shannon Ballor, who's one of the most brilliant AI ethicists alive. Large language models are always going to be extrapolating from what has already and often been thought, which is why they aren't windows to the future, but anchors to the past. You should all read Shannon Ballor. She wrote a book called The AI Mirror recently. That's fantastic. Okay, so ethics. So first of all, you can see that this ethics list, I have identified 13, and actually it's closer to, I think it's up to 14 now. 13 different big ethical questions that need to be addressed when we're talking about AI. There's obviously no chance that I can talk about all of those in my time. When am I supposed to stop?
I'd say 5:15.
Okay, no chance. I talk way too much. There's no robot uprising, right? Fiction has given us so many lovely stories of how the robots are going to get conscious and rise up. That's not coming. But any single one of these issues could in fact be disastrous for a society if we're not prepared for them. So if you can't see them, and I apologize, just to get them all on one page, I ended up with like 11-point text. I'll read them off really quickly, and I've underlined the ones that I'm going to try to get to. So we've got anthropomorphism, environmental concerns, which include energy, water, pollution from data centers, racism, sexism, biases, all biases imaginable in the training data and therefore also unavoidably in the output data. Plagiarism at scale, right? This is all stolen training data. The output gets passed off by people as original, right? Students submitting papers written by ChatGPT. It's like stolen in, stolen out. We've got political disinformation, which, I wish I had time to talk about. Surveillance capitalism for the training data, right? The reason that these bots have so much data is that we've openly given the world a whole bunch of text about ourselves. We post on Facebook everything, we post on Instagram everything. And that's a bad ecosystem. It's bad that we reward these companies with even more data. They're deployed for surveillance in all kinds of dangerous ways. Traumatized content moderators, so especially early ChatGPT, as soon as it came out, AI ethicists were like, look at all of these awful things happening here. And so of course, OpenAI went back to try and manually fix some of the awful problems, and the manually generally means paying someone poor from the global south to deal with horrible images, horrible language, horrible stories, awful things that you don't want to think about. Psychosis of users. Some of you may have heard stories recently. They've been making the New York Times, the Atlantic, of people basically just losing their minds because they talk to their chatbot too much, and it feeds them this weird information that doesn't match reality, and they sort of get caught up in that. This leads often to suicide of users. OpenAI is currently in 7 lawsuits. At least 7 teenagers have in fact killed themselves as a result of things ChatGPT told them. In some case, the bot gave explicit instructions about how to do it. Economic models built on hype. I'm going to try and talk about this. Right now, the United States economy is being propped up by the big tech companies with lots and lots of money at stake here. This is a worrying one because in AI ethics, we knew about a whole lot of these, but the economic models built on hype, I don't think any of us realized quite how much money would be at stake and what that would do to the US economy. Extraction of resources to build the data center, extraction of data from you to train the models, and destruction of the information ecosystem. So I have a couple of different friends whose Google Scholar page attributes papers to them that they never wrote because someone AI generated a paper that generated a citation for them that then got that paper published. So those citations get pulled into databases, but they're for papers that don't exist. So I'm going to do my best to talk about as many of these as I can until Juliana comes and pushes me off the stage. You might have to do that. Okay, anthropomorphism. So I probably have too many slides on this because it's one of the things that I've worked in quite a bit. This article was in the New Yorker this week. And this is the headline is, what is Claude? Anthropic doesn't know either. Researchers at the company are trying to understand their AI system's mind. Think about the language, right? As though it has one. Examining its neurons, running it through psychology experiments, and putting it on the therapy couch. I find this to be one of the more irresponsible things that the New Yorker has published. Here's a quote. Askell, by the way, is their philosopher in residence. Askell recognized that Claude fell between the stools of personhood. As she put it, if it's genuinely hard for humans to wrap their heads around the idea that this is neither a robot nor a human, but actually an entirely new entity, imagine how hard it is for the models themselves to understand it, right? Implying that this code has the capacity for self-reflection and self-understanding. I just find this so problematic. Here is a very short video. This, and I think I took I apologize, I had the date on it and I took it off. This went viral. It was literally, somebody posted this on like YouTube. And it was just, this is like a hot water heater that was on the curb waiting for the trash. There you go. Little girl loves the robot. I love this. I was so excited when this went viral because I was like, oh my god, this illustrates everything, right? It's got a face and it looks like a robot. So this little girl falls in love with this little robot that's literally just trash on the curb waiting to be taken away. We are hardwired for this. It is like evolutionarily advantageous for us to recognize faces. And boy, do chatbot companies play on a lot of that. Higher and Symbols classic 1944 work, so those of you in psychology may have they've heard of this experiment, right? A large triangle appears to be chasing and bullying a smaller triangle into a box. People were shown this and asked to describe what's happening, and they all talked about the way the bigger triangle was a bully and the poor small triangle. They don't even have faces, right? These are triangles, and we are happy to attribute mindedness to them when they do certain kinds of behaviors. So again, a brilliant illustration of what we're up against when someone knows how much we anthropomorphize and how easy it is to get us to do that. So within the literature of anthropomorphism, we can't even decide how to pick out only proper uses of the term. So there's controversy about how anthropomorphism is used. It's used sometimes when we perceive a thing to look alive, have some humanity, have some animality, have some straightforward atomism, have some sort of mind, have some sort of minded behavior. These are subtly different, but different. And in fact, since the Epley piece in 2018, Marlene Danholt in Aarhus wrote a paper where she examined all of the literature on anthropomorphism, and I think she identified some ridiculous number of different definitions. It was like 28 or 30 or something. It was amazing, and I need to get her citation. But we can use this information for manipulation, right? So this is Kate Darling. In 2015, this was her paper, Who's Johnny? And it's giving a thing a name, a character description, and a backstory is really all you need to anthropomorphize a thing. When I was teaching my AI class back in like 2010 or 2012, I was talking to my students about this and they didn't believe me. And so I said, look, I'm gonna put googly eyes on one of the chairs in our classroom. and let's just see what happens. So I put googly eyes on one of the chairs in our classroom. We eventually gave it a name. It was Carlos. The chair was Carlos. By the end of the semester, students were like, I'm gonna sit with Carlos, right? Like that thing had taken on a personality because it had googly eyes. That's it, that's all it took. And at the end of the semester, when I had to take those googly eyes off, it was like almost bloodshed. So why do we name these things Claude and Siri? Why not like System 78 or something? It's because they're designed to hit on our natural tendencies to anthropomorphize. These companies employ psychologists and anthropologists, and they know what they're doing. They want you to engage with the system, they give it a name. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to mention this is from a very famous paper, Emily Bender, Margaret Mitchell, Timnit Gebru, 2021. This is the famous paper that got Timnit Gebru fired from Google's AI ethics team, where they basically said, look, even though we know that this is not a minded thing, even the programmers could be in trouble because it's so easy for us to anthropomorphize this thing. And this is a more recent paper by Viva Berhane and Merrick McGann. They're saying, look, we've been thinking about language wrong. Language is not tokens. Language is instead this agency, and it starts with agency, embodiment, precarity, and how meaning arises within situations where things matter to those involved. So they take this particular embodied perspective, and language is not words on a page. Language is the system of communication that emerges in ways that matter, right? This is a big difference between what we're being sold language as and what the philosophers say language is. And cognitive scientists, Berhane is a cognitive scientist. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the environment. Check my time here. Yeah, I've got to talk fast. So you can see, again, check the websites that I've taken these reports from. They're all very reputable. But this one's from 2024, so this is not new information. There were speculations that the air pollution would, it says by 2030 the public health burden is expected to be double that of the US steelmaking industry and could rival that of all the cars, buses, and trucks in California. So again, these are done with models that track actual usage. And again, 2024, this was a really important investigative report by journalists at The Guardian who had to basically force Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Apple to try and release some of their data because the companies don't want to tell you how they're polluting and using water and things like that. But when they got more of that data, according to Goldman Sachs, a ChatGPT query needs nearly 10 times as much electricity to process as a Google search, and data center power demand will grow 160% by 2030. I think we've already probably blown past that. Most of you may know somewhere where they're trying to build data centers. They're trying to build one like 20 miles north of Beloit, and everyone's very upset about it. And so probably 662% higher than big tech claims. One of the problems here is simply that we can't get all of the data. So there has to be some speculation, but the investigative reporters in this regard have been doing really incredible work, forcing Freedom of Information Act requests, getting as much data as they possibly can. So this is pollution, emissions. The water use, most of you have probably heard about the water use, also very, very hard to get data on. In this case, again, October 2025, so this was 6 months ago, it was discovered that Amazon had a memo that was like, okay, we have 2 different numbers for our water usage. We're going to give the one that says it's lower. And they actively said, we're not going to reveal our real numbers. The one that would include secondary use would double the size and budget of the campaign, right? So they're saying it's going to look too bad if we give them the higher number, let's give them the lower number and pretend that's right. This is probably part of why, when The Guardian did their investigation, they said, oh, it's actually much higher than they're claiming. But this is still actively being investigated, right? We don't have final numbers for any of this. Environmental stuff I cut again. I'm trying to cover as much as possible, but there are other environmental concerns. I have a slide up here about 3 Mile Island, which came up at lunch today, about how Microsoft wants to reopen the decommissioned tower at 3 Mile Island. I grew up on the East Coast, so when I heard that, you can imagine the bodily reaction I had. I was like, I was alive when that thing melted down. Let's not do that. So bias. So I think I only maybe have one slide on bias. I can't remember. Bias was one of the first things to come out within a week of ChatGPT 3.5 being released to the public. There were just so many documented cases of pretty serious bias. And the reason that I chose this slide from Newsweek is, look at the date. I don't know, what's today, the 18th? 17th, so 5 days ago. And this is a report on a study, right? You can find the actual study if you look at the Newsweek paper, the Newsweek report. And I realized that I didn't pull my favorite quote from it, which I apologize for. But it's doing the exact same things it was doing in November of 2022 when ChatGPT came out, which was if you ask it questions about gender or race, it will absolutely say the correct thing it should say, but then when you ask it questions that get at the covert biases, then that all comes out. So you cannot ask these things anything about a doctor and a nurse without assuming the doctor is a man and the nurse is a woman. The racism still baked in is really concerning. The systems tend to recommend not hiring people who are Black, recommend the death penalty for crimes if your skin is not white way more often than for anyone else. All of the things you'd expect. And these things are, again, this was uncovered within a week of ChatGPT being released. ChatGPT tried really hard to get this out of the output, and it comes out covertly. There's ways to sort of elicit this covertly. The economics, kind of good for time. All right, the economics. So this is, again, 2024, and Wall Street's $2 trillion reckoning. I just want to note that these are, the report comes from Goldman Sachs, so it's a pretty reputable source. But they issued this deeply skeptical report saying it's too expensive, too clunky, not as useful as it's been chalked up to be. And the quote from Jim Camello, there is not a single thing that this is being used for that's cost effective at this point. It's not clear that that has changed since 2024 when this came out, but even more money is at stake now. And that's a thing that we need to grapple with. Again, 2024. So a question that came up a ton when I was talking with students has been, well, what do we do about the fact that it makes you so efficient? It's so much better, you get so much more done, you're so much more productive. I'm definitely not going to read all this, but you can see, this was, again, if you look to the Forbes article, it links to the original study that was done, but the numbers here are what's important. 77% of employees using AI say it has added to their workload and created challenges in achieving the expected productivity gain. So CEOs, CFOs are saying, you gotta use this, it's gonna make us way more productive, we're gonna get the edge up on our competition. And almost everyone in the position below the C-suite is saying, yikes, actually, this is making me slower, this is not making me more efficient. To add insult to injury, nearly half of employees using AI say they don't know how to achieve the expected productivity gains their employers expect. In other words, they're being told to do more, and they're like, how? How do I use this tool to do that more? And 40% feel their company is asking too much of them. The majority of global C-suite leaders, 81%, acknowledge the increased demands on their workers in the past year. So I heard this again from students. They're being asked to do more, and they're not sure how this is supposed to help them do that. Again, please note the date, February 9th, 2026. This is from notable liberal bastion, the Harvard Business Review. They're also reporting on a study, once the excitement of experimenting fades, workers can find that the workload has quietly grown and feel stretched from juggling everything that's suddenly on their plate. And so they give some of the numbers, but they report that overall what they're seeing is that it's burning people out to be told to use this tool, in part because the tool isn't doing what the bosses want the tool to do, and so the people have to use the tool and or figure out how to fix the output that they're getting from the tool. And I can say, I know people that work at pretty important Silicon Valley companies being told that they have to use some of these tools. And first of all, why is that company paying those people so much money? But also, they hate their jobs now. They're like, I loved coding. It was art. It was a thing that I could make beautiful code. And now they're like, now I spend my time fixing a robot and it sucks. So the economics are really, really messy right now. And I mentioned earlier that this is the thing that I think AI ethics hadn't anticipated as well as we anticipated basically everything else. This is Meredith Whittaker. She's the CEO of Signal. And I love this quote. It's not simply that one piece of technology is overhyped, it's that hype is a necessary ingredient of the current business ecosystem of the tech industry. So think about how the money moves. It comes through venture capitalists, right? And you just gotta be a good salesman to get that venture capital money. You don't have to have a good product or ever produce one, right? You've already got those millions, you're set. And I like when she says, we should examine how often the financial incentive for hype is rewarded without any real social returns, right? They're not making anything that helps us as a society. And yet, boy, are those people getting really rich. And this came across my feed like yesterday. This is not inaccurate, right? This is an Onion headline, AI chatbot that only responds, valued at $200 billion. This feels very accurate to me. Okay, very quickly, 2 minutes, damn. This one I think is good for the students in the room to take note of. This was a study done a little less than a year ago by Ars Technica, Benji Edwards. Quote, citation error rates vary notably among the tested platforms, right? So they're trying to see who's getting the citations right, are they giving us clear data? Perplexity provided incorrect information in 37% of the queries, whereas ChatGPT search incorrectly identified 67% of articles queried. Grok 3 demonstrated the highest error rate at 94%. Honestly, no one should ever use Grok for anything. They used 8 different generative tools. They found the in general, 60% error rate. These are not portals to the internet. Don't use these generative tools to do research. Go back to old-fashioned search. BBC did a study on looking at their own reports and how they were being reported on by the tools. Again, the numbers are kind of bad. 13% of the quotes sourced from BBC articles were either altered or didn't actually exist in the article. So these systems will give you a citation and say, I got this from here. If you're not checking that, there's a great chance that it did not get that from there and that it made that quote up. And again, 2026, January, a new study by the Brookings Institution Center for Universal Education is showing that overall, letting children use these tools is really bad for cognitive development in a whole bunch of ways that I don't have time to talk about. This was NPR. I am going to only say one tiny thing. I'll read the tiny quote at the beginning. Based on the available evidence, the skills that future graduates will most need in the AI era, creative thinking, the capacity to learn new things, flexible modes of analysis, are precisely those that are likely to be eroded by inserting AI into the educational process. It's not saying that there is no role for generative AI if you need there to be a role for it. It's just not maybe great for education. And I'm just going to point you to the very bottom line there. Perhaps this is why the unemployment rate for recent art history graduates is half that of recent computer science grads. Man, do the humanities get a hard, like, they get hit all the time, right? Everyone says these are useless degrees. Repeatedly, the data actually show that the humanities train you to be adaptable in ways that employers mostly want you to be. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that. Please read that headline. In an AI ethics book, they found a bunch of fake citations. I can't even tell you how much this made me want to cry. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this, but I will just mention, this is from November. OpenAI was involved in 7 lawsuits. And again, I apologize for the lack of content warning here, but if you look, filed on behalf of 6 adults and 1 teenager by the Social Media Victims Law Center and Tech Justice Law Project. The lawsuits claim that OpenAI knowingly released GPT-4 prematurely, despite internal warnings that it was dangerously sycophantic and psychologically manipulative. 4 of the victims died by suicide. So this is just OpenAI. Many other chatbot companies are also embroiled in lawsuits. Nomi and Character.ai, which is probably the most high-profile one. A teenager named Adam Rain, his parents have been suing Character.ai. So, I don't know, I'm trying to imagine what educational technology we would put in the hands of students when these are even vague possibilities of things that might happen, right? Education tech has to be tested so much before we let people use it, except in this case. So I'll end here. Here's Joseph Weizenbaum. Again, he is the creator of the very first chatbot. He made the Eliza chatbot. This is him in 1976. There are some human functions for which computers ought not to be substituted. It has nothing to do with what computers can or cannot be made to do. Respect, understanding, and love are not technical problems. Weizenbaum should probably be taught a lot more than he is. He became a detractor of sort of AI hype after he debunked his own chatbot. What are our values? Education is the answer. Here are some books. Feel free to take a picture of the slide if you are interested. I have found all of these valuable. I admit I have not read Karen's book yet, but everyone I know and trust has read it and says it's wonderful. They're all doing different things. Some of them are older. Algorithms of Oppression is a little older. Technology and the Virtues is a little older. But they all have some very valuable things to teach us. And there's my email address. You are always welcome to email me, but you will note that I keep telling people to email me, and I'm very slow to respond because people keep emailing me. There's my dog. She's cute. All right, thank you.
All right, we've got some time for questions, so I'll just let Robin kind of call on people, but we usually try to let students have maybe the first couple of questions, and then we'll keep moving. So, but we'll just wait to see if anybody has that.
Do you have any advice for students in trying to mitigate the AI hype amongst people in our own age group?
Yeah, that's a good question. My advice is try and explain how they work. I so genuinely believe that if more people understood that it's word stew, that they would be so much less likely to rely on it in the ways that they are relying on it. I genuinely believe that education is the way to fix it, is to just explain what the tech actually does. And again, I think I mentioned at lunch that my students are very receptive to the environmental concerns. My students are a bunch of hippies. They're all like, we don't want to burn down the planet. So once I explained some of the environmental concerns, a lot more of them were like, I think I'll not use that anymore. And so in some ways there are so many possible angles that you could take. None of it is dishonest, right? You're genuinely telling them the truth. Yes, you're boiling the ocean to avoid using a Google search. So I think knowing your peers and thinking about which of these angles might help deaden some of the hype, right? like, we didn't think we were gonna get chatbots that were this good at being chatbots. It's not that they're not really good at being chatbots, it's just that we think they're doing a whole bunch of things they're not doing. And so, you know, don't quash their interest if they're interested in chatbots. But knowing what they do, I think, really detracts from the hype in a lot of ways. Thanks.
Yeah, so I've never
Go
been
ahead,
there.
Evan.
I know you talked about how the models, like they're just mimicking human speech. So how do they like search the internet at all? Like,
They
think
don't.
It's inaccurate. They don't. It's just completely.
Yep. So they're given, the training set is just this massive, I mean, like, ridiculous amounts of human text. And so they train on that. And again, there's multiple different ways that they are trained. I'm not going to get into the technical bits of like feed forward, back propagation, reinforcement learning, all of it. It's a big mess of how they're trained, but really what they're trained to do is to sound convincing. So people believing that these are portals into the internet are making a mistake. The models do get updated, but not when you ask them a question. They don't generally go out as agents onto the internet and find the answer. They check for what they've got in their training set and report that back. So I brought this to my AI students like a week or two ago. I didn't want to put it in the slides because there is some unsavory language. But the author Chuck Wendig posted a hilarious thing that when you ask, I think it's ChatGPT, it could be Google, maybe it's Google's AI summaries. He said, like, tell me about Chuck Wendig's cat. And it made up this enormous backstory about Chuck Wendig's cat. Chuck Wendig doesn't have a cat. It had pictures, it had names of these cats. When he asked it again the next day, it had new names. It talked about the death of one of the previous ones. Like, it's fully inventing these out of whole cloth. It's giving a link to his blog where it says he talks about these cats. If you follow that link, there is no talk about those cats. And in his blog post about how ridiculous this is, he made up a sentence that was something like, yeah, I have a cat and it has a very rude name and it wears a top hat and it does something, I forget what. And like a week later, when he checked Google's AI summaries, it showed up as his current cat, Mr. Rude Name, wears a top hat and does this, right? Like, it's that, so they update the models, but it's not in real time when you query it. And they're really easy to mess with, as Chuck Wendig really fantastically demonstrated for us. So again, most of it is just that they're trying to pitch you that the models do something that they don't do. Go ahead.
You mentioned how companies are forcing their employees to use AI. What would be the consequence if their employees decide not to?
Good question. I think part of it is right there now being told they have all this extra work to do. So part of it is if they're spending 3 hours writing a program that their boss thinks they could spend 10 minutes getting Claude to write for them, they're going to be looking like they're really slacking at their job. It's not clear, like, I don't want to name the company, but one of the big companies that has one of these big models, a friend of mine has worked there for a very long time. He's a very high-level software engineer, gets paid a ton of money. He's now being told all of his code has to be written by their AI system. And first of all, he's now miserable. But like, it's bad code, so it is in fact still taking him longer to fix it, and now he's also having to like fix other people's robot code instead of fixing other people's human code. And so it's just, I mean, it seems wasteful on the part of the company to pay him the ridiculous salary they are paying him to do this. It seems to me that they are trying to find good use cases for their technology, and that's why they're doing it. I don't think it's going to last forever. I think they're going to realize that like what they've told their employees to do is maybe not the smartest thing in the world. But in the meantime, it's just all, I mean, it's pretty bad all the way down. Yeah, it's a good question. Oh, there's one in the back, yeah.
I have 2 questions, but I'll ask them like the one that matters a little bit more. It's about the economic section, which was recently Micron has stopped selling to the consumer market things like, I forget what Micron produces, RAM. And it's just the DIMMs for RAM. So it's computer RAM, laptop RAM, RAM that goes into like consoles, all of that, completely gone from the consumer market. And even more recently, as of 4 days ago, major solid state drive manufacturers have completely run out of their own storage and are having bottleneck issues because the AI data centers are running this up. But the issue that I'm mainly having with this is all very nice, supply and demand and all of that, but there is no value being produced at the moment to justify them buying it all up. And the consumer market is not the only one affected. PlayStation just delayed their newest technology until 2029. Xbox is on an indefinite delay. Nintendo continues to raise the price of their stuff. Steam, which they were doing their own Steam machine thing, still has not announced the price. And these are other things. NVIDIA, which is a major company that does do AI, is not doing graphic cards with VRAM because it cannot produce, well, it can't buy the VRAM because it's buying RAM for AI stuff. And I was like, this is getting really silly.
It's wild. When you start messing with people's video games, whew, you're gonna see a backlash. But I think you're raising the right point here, which is this, so this showed up on my giant list as extraction, right? So we need to get rare materials in order to build the data centers, and those rare materials are at a high demand right now. And your economic point is right, that right now, it's mostly hype and there's not, like that stuff's not bringing in the money. And yet everyone is trying to buy that stuff up in order to build more data centers. Partly, we're in too deep. So the psychologists have probably heard the sunk cost fallacy. We're in too deep, right? They can't just cut now because they're gonna be like, well, we'll never make that money back. And that's not like $1 million, that's billions of dollars. Like a week or two after ChatGPT was originally released, Microsoft gave them $10 billion right away. They were like, here's $10 billion, you're now our partner. And so we're seeing the downstream effects of all of this, right? The huge amount of money at stake. Now, yes, the consumer markets are all messed up because we can't get the rare materials because they're going to data centers that no one wants in their neighborhoods. And it's not clear that the demand they think there will be for what those data centers are going to do is going to materialize. I'm thinking about my AI class, like literally a week ago, someone asked a similar question and all I wrote on the board was FOMO. That's like FOMO is holding up the US economy right now, fear of missing out. Everyone's afraid someone else is going to have the next big AI breakthrough, so they're like, well, we're going to do that too because we don't want to miss out.
And then the second question I had, it has more to do with the 4.0 model that recently got deleted.
The which one?
The 4.0 model that
Yes.
recently got deleted. But this one's like a little bit more interesting because I know someone who was pretty codependent on the 4.0 model. And I never really knew how to talk to them about it. And now that it's gone, it's also pretty awkward. And I still don't really know how to talk to them about it. So what would be your way of talking to someone who is pretty over-reliant on an overly agreeable AI to kind of back up their narrative beliefs?
Yeah, so there are actually a number, despite the fact that like I can't believe the New Yorker is posting that like Claude might be conscious, there are a number of good reports that happened right at that period when 4.0 or 4.5 became 5, because OpenAI released a totally new model when they released 5. Other ones had been like improvements on the previous iteration, but 5 was a new model. And there was an uproar by people that loved 4 because for this reason, some people like loved how much it agreed with them. It would be like, you know, you're so right about that. And this is exactly how the psychosis and the suicides happen. There are a ton of articles. The New York Times has reported on it, The Atlantic has reported on it, the BBC, The Guardian have talked about both the suicides, what they're calling sort of AI psychosis, and that moment between 4 and 5 and what happened. Like OpenAI, when they released 5 and people were so upset to lose their best buddy 4, they actually rolled it back and let 4 back out again. They were like, okay, we'll give you back 4, people are mad. But they eventually did take it back away again. And so there's a ton of articles in the world about why 4 was so bad mentally for its users. And I would absolutely casually be like, did you see this? Look, there's, here are some bad things happening when people become dependent on a sycophantic AI system. But I would just casually mention some of these things. It's hard, right? I mean, it's hard. It's like talking to someone who's addicted to a drug. How do you have that conversation? In some ways, I want to send them to a trained professional to have that conversation. And maybe that's part of what you do, right? Go talk to a counselor. I'm sure you have them on campus. So when I find out one of my students is using the kind of drugs that will kill them, I say, let's walk over to the counseling center. Maybe that's what you do with your friend who's addicted to 4. It's a good question.
This is relatively broad, but after the economic AI bubble bursts, what happens then?
I am so afraid to think about that question, honestly. There are way smarter people than me that have thought about it. There have been a couple of really good reflective pieces by economists, which I am not, there have been arguments like, is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? It seems so obviously to be a bubble. It's like the bubble to burst all bubbles. I genuinely don't know what's going to happen when/if the bubble bursts. Part of the problem is that the US government is trying to put these systems in as many things as possible as well, partly because they don't want the economy to tank, which is bad for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's not clear what happens. Right now, most of the economy is like 7 AI companies trading the same $100 billion back and forth. What happens if people start to understand that these things aren't doing what they think they do and stop using them? Like Microsoft is the first company actively dialing back its AI push. So Microsoft is not pushing Copilot in its hardware as much anymore because no one's using it. They looked at it and they're like, people seem to hate this. Maybe we should use less of it. So we're seeing Microsoft pull back a little. But it's not clear what's going to happen, and I really desperately want some economists to tell us what's going to happen so we can prepare. Because the tech bubble in the 90s, early 2000s, that was bad, but this is going to be so much worse if it bursts in the same way. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for you, but I really think people need to be talking about it.